This is true, eh? It all seems like we're kind of like in a Groundhog Day, I think, and yeah, I'm not sure it's one of Bill Murray's better films, but anyhow, it is what it is. No, things are good. Spring is finally arriving here in Canada. The snow is finally melting from the roof. Had about 6 feet of snow on the front lawn, so I can see grass now here and there. So I'm a happy guy. I do, yeah. So it's my sixth book in 6 years. My kids tell me on a regular basis. They say, "Dad, we love you to bits, but you clearly suck at retirement." Because I've been retired for 6 years, I've written six books. So this one, I'm not sure how many of your followers are Canadian, Steve, but this is an actual history of terrorism in Canada since our founding as a country, almost a full century after you guys gained your independence. But it's told through the perspective of the people that actually worked in counterterrorism. So it's not an academic book. It's not a history per se. It's actually talking to people who did investigations, recruited human sources, did surveillance, all that kind of stuff. And it's called The Peaceable Kingdom. Now, the only thing is it's self-published, which means you kind of got to get it through me and my website. But yeah, it was a lot of fun talking to my former colleagues who kind of just, wanted to tell their story because, you don't hear a lot from intelligence folks. I'm not sure. It's better in your country than it is in mine. I mean, every time I turn on the news, there's always an ex-FBI or ex-CIA guy talking to the media. Up here, no one who worked in the business talks. It's really, really rare. So I wanted to tell their story for them, tell all of our successes and the occasional failure when it comes to terrorism. But yeah, it was a labor of love because I worked at the security service when many of these cases were unfolding. So I had a lot of my own personal memories, but it's really cool to get the experiences of the men and women who actually, worked at the coalface for as long as they did. And yeah, it was. Yeah, so either intelligence or law enforcement. I did talk to a couple of foreign people that agreed to talk to me about what it was like working alongside of Canadians because as well as I do, there's a lot of sharing that goes on in this business. Obviously you guys in the States are our biggest partner, always have been and always will be. But when you're working in terrorism and you get some wanker who decides to leave your country, go to Afghanistan, it helps to have allies around the world to figure out where he is, what he's doing, and to get to him before he starts killing people. So yeah, but mostly Canadians, yeah. The Five Eyes. Yeah, since the Second World War, it's by far it's kind of the gold standard in terms of intelligence sharing clubs, and it makes sense, right? We're all English speaking, we all have the same culture more or less, kind of the same history more or less, and we kind of understand each other. So when you get around the table, there's not a lot of kind of awkward silences. Whereas if you I remember dealing with the Russians after the wall fell. And we actually had them part of it. If you remember, the G7 became the G8. We brought Russia in. We thought we could make the Russians play nice. Look how that worked, right? And it was kind of a different. There's a different mindset. They just don't have our shared sense of looking at the world. So it depends. The more Western the country is, the more they kind of get it. You're dealing with the Pakistanis or whatever. It's just a different view on things, I guess. Not that you don't talk to them, but it's just a little more difficult. Or yeah, or Canadians that blew shit up abroad. So we've had an unfortunate reality, just like you've had in the States, 2010s, and killed dozens of people in Iraq and Syria and Bangladesh, in North Africa. And so it was anything that basically either happened here or Canadians that went abroad and did something. And at the end of the, go ahead, sorry. Mhm. Yeah. Well, okay. So the estimates are there's between 30 and 40,000 people left their homelands to go join ISIS. Okay. Now, the most of them, not surprisingly, are from North Africa, Middle East, that kind of stuff, South Asia. But there are like 2,000 from France that went. Another 1,500 from the United Kingdom went. The estimates I've seen for your country are a couple hundred, just as they are here. a couple hundred Americans, a couple hundred Canadians went to join ISIS, and some of them made it and died. Some of them didn't make it. You've had a couple of trials in your country where people have been, subject to FBI operations and charged and sent to long jail sentences. We haven't had, I think we've only had one successful prosecution about a wannabe, somebody who, or sorry, no, he wasn't a wannabe. He actually went and he came back. Having the biggest problem with this, of course, is evidence gathering. I mean, they left, but then once they're there, how do you gather evidence in a war zone? And given our standards of in our judicial systems, you want to make sure it's the right evidence, because you don't want your case to be lost, right? Which goes to a whole other question about all the people that are still over there. People say, well, we need to bring them home, and I'm saying, well, no, we don't. You guys made shitty decisions, and you committed crimes in a foreign country. We have to allow those foreign countries every opportunity to. And they killed people here in Canada. So essentially, they said, you've forbidden me from achieving my destiny. I'm just going to, no pun intended. I'm just going to achieve it here. And we had two military officers killed in 2 days apart in October of 2014 by people that really wanted to go die over there. So it's kind of a damned if you damned if you don't. Well, again, and that's a really good point. And in fact, in both cases, or at least in the one case, it wasn't a Canadian passport. He was trying to get a Libyan passport. So we have a little less, I guess, influence there. In the other case, he was actually talking to law enforcement, and we told him, we know what you're doing. And he said, yeah, I get it. I've changed my mind. I'll be a good boy now. I've seen the light of day. You've reached me. And then 3 weeks later, he got into a car, waited in a parking lot until he saw a guy in uniform walk by and ran him over and killed him. So, you know what? Even if you do talk to these guys, I mean, unless you actually charge them and incarcerate them, there's no guarantees they're not going to do stupid shit down the road, eh? Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I think it's even easier in your country to lay charges than it is in Canada. I think we have a hell of a time doing that. And then the other problem we have is that, so where I used to work for the security service, we don't collect evidence, we collect intelligence, where it's law enforcement, in our case, the RCMP, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, which is the National Police Force. They collect evidence. And there's a big difference between those two, whereas in your country, the FBI does evidence right from the get-go. So if the FBI has enough information, they can go and lay charges. If the information that we have is solely intelligence derived, that can't be used in court. It's not robust enough to go to court with. So we might be in a case where we have lots of information on, Phil Gursky, but enough to go to court with. So we might be in a case where we have lots of information on, Phil Gursky, but it's not strong enough to. It's a real tough one. This isn't easy stuff. Go to court. It's all, and then of course you've got the whole in your country First Amendment. This isn't easy stuff. In our country, the Charter of Rights and Freedom in terms of freedom of speech, right? You can say an awful lot of stupid shit. Our country, and not be arrested for it, and not be charged for it, right? And I think we certainly saw that, right? We talk about the whole far right thing in your country, which of course is now it's kind of the soup du jour, right? Everyone wants to talk about the far right. We talk about the whole far right. An awful lot of things that, of course, is now strike us in Canada is kind of skirting that line between legal and illegal. are completely
Like us,
legal in your
Canada is
land, and
kind of
because of your
skirting
very
that,
strong
that
First
line
Amendment,
between legal
and
and
that really
illegal.
put are completely legal in your land, and because of your very strong
Yeah.
First Amendment,
Yeah,
and
so
that
a lot of
really
your
put,
crazy conservatives have started to come down here. Or
yeah,
not started to, but they
sorry,
have. I know we've got,
sorry.
pretty sure
Yeah,
Stephen Crowder
that's
came
one.
from you guys, Lauren Southern, Jordan Peterson. Not to say that all
Yeah,
these people are the same, but
That, that's one of our biggest exports. Eh? We figure let's just send them to the Americans, so they won't be a pain in the ass here.
Stefan Molyneux, yeah, you guys really. But
Sorry about that. Our bad.
to be fair, I like our freedom of speech laws. Might mean a little bit more terrorism, but maybe we disagree on that one. But I understand. Yeah.
But but see, I mean, if you're going to err on the side of free speech, right? Because what we're doing around the world now on a daily basis is a lot of countries are essentially saying that anything that opposes the current government is terrorism.
Sure.
So Turkey is saying that if you don't support Erdogan, you're a terrorist. If you don't support Putin, you're a terrorist. If you don't support Mugabe, you're a terrorist. And a lot of countries are suspending all kinds of open media, social media, and news sources because they're basically in opposition to the governments, and they're changing laws to say that essentially you're a terrorist. So we don't want to go to that extent at the same time, right? But I think in countries like yours and like mine, where we're liberal secular democracies, it's probably a better thing to allow more to happen than less to happen. The real challenge is, as I said earlier, where do you draw that line, right?
Yeah,
because you don't want people to die, you don't want people being killed. But it's a tough one, and essentially what it comes down to is it's a case by case basis. There's no pattern to this. There's no rubric that you can apply, and you just trust that your law enforcement intelligence agencies have enough information on which to make the right decisions. And even that's a whole other ball of wax. I mean, one thing that people don't talk about is that the vast majority of people that say stupid shit online never do anything.
Yeah.
Right? They don't pick up a gun. They don't pick up a knife. They don't get into a van and drive down, a busy street in Charlottesville or whatever, and knocking over protesters. So the challenge then becomes how do you weed out the wannabes from the real ones?
Yeah. Even the vast majority of radicalized people don't do anything, right? Yeah. It's
Exactly.
just the minority, the minority. Yeah.
Yeah. In all my time at the security service, we had legitimate investigations based on our legislation, but like maybe 5% actually ever. Doesn't mean you wasted your time with the 95% because you have to figure out who they were and what they're, whether they had the intent or the capability. But I think the bottom line is that most people are either stupid, incompetent, or cowards. And I know that, especially in your country, and January 6th kind of set the paradigm right now, is that there's all kinds of incredibly violent laden speech or threatening speech online. But 99% of those guys aren't getting out of their parents' basement.
Yeah. And even to be a little bit more charitable to them, I would say that a lot of it can just be like hyperbole and anger online too, right? Like it's easier to write online like, oh, I'm going to go bomb someplace or whatever without really ever actually wanting to do it. Like it's just a tweet made.
It's attention seeking in some ways too. And,
you get your retweets and everything. Yeah. But it can be hard to figure out that there is some percentage of these people that's serious, but how do you ever discern one from the other, right?
Well, exactly. You don't want to come in overbearing, because if you do, then you look stupid and you start violating people's, constitutional rights out of our countries. But then if you get it wrong, people say, well, why did you get it wrong? And the one thing we've learned in security intelligence and extends to law enforcement as well is that you're only as good as your last failure.
Yeah.
Because nobody really cares when you get it right. They just really care when you get it wrong. And this is, I've been really following the debate in your country over January 6th, and everyone's saying, intelligence failure. This was not a failure of intelligence. The intelligence was there. It was a failure to act on it. And I don't think I'm disclosing any state secrets, Steve, but your former president wasn't exactly someone that wanted to crack down on far-right extremists.
True.
So the messages that were being given weren't being listened to.
Yeah, I might fight with you on this a little bit. I wanted to buy that narrative a lot because it was attractive to me, obviously, because I absolutely fucking hate Trump. But the ironic thing was, based on all the statements that were coming out, even at the time I saw this, I was like, oh man, and now that the dust has settled, it actually seems to me like the January 6th thing was more the, I don't even remember the names anymore. Fuck, it's been so long since I followed this so closely. I think the mayor was so worried about the appearance of like federal troops and everything on.
Yes.
Yeah. And it ended up being that I don't think I would lay any of the blame. Now, once they started asking for reinforced everything, things get a little bit
I don't
hazier,
disagree with you.
But I think I would
you're right there.
I would
There
primarily
certainly
lay
was.
the
And,
blame on the DC mayor
I'm the
for
same.
what happened.
I feel the same way about
disagree
Trump
with
that
you.
you do.
I think you're right
He
there.
certainly
There
wasn't
certainly was.
helpful.
And,
Although I'm not trying to lay the
I'm the same.
blame on him, but
I feel the same
I do
way
know
about Trump
people that
that
you
worked
do.
in intelligence.
He
They were
certainly
friends of
wasn't
mine.
helpful.
Though I'm not trying to lay the blame on him, I do know people that worked in intelligence. They were friends of mine, whether for the bureau or the agency, and I would hear from them constantly that there was a real sense of frustration that they were trying to get messages across on a whole variety of things, but because of the ideological commitment of the last administration, they were being ignored.
Sure.
They were being told, we don't want to hear that. The president doesn't want to hear about this. He wants to hear about this other thing. And when you work in intelligence, you go to work every day for one reason only. You produce the best intelligence you can to help people make decisions, right? Senior policymakers, prime ministers, presidents, ministers, all that kind of stuff. You don't care the political stripe of who you're serving. In my time in Canada, everything from far right to far left and everything in between, you're just there to say, here's what we know, here's how sure we are. We're pretty confident intelligence is true, and now what are you going to do about it? And if they choose to ignore it, it's not a damn thing you can do.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying we're not right all the time. I wouldn't be so stupid as to say we're right all the time. But in an awful lot of cases, we do have a sort of advanced warning that things are happening. And you do your best to get that message to those who need to hear it in a timely fashion. But, the mixed metaphor I use is that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him use the intelligence.
Sure, yeah. There's something that you mentioned, you're only just by your last failure. Like, I try to be sympathetic towards failures to act because whether we're talking Benghazi or whether we're talking in the U.S., there was a guy that was under, I wish I could remember this case. There was a guy that went and he either did a school shooting or some like mass shooting, and he was under FBI surveillance. And they knew at the time that he was under surveillance, and then he went out and he did a shooting, and everybody obviously was upset, like, hold on, you guys are watching this guy, and he still went on and did something. Like, what the fuck, what happened? Like, you guys are just worthless. But then, like, I noticed, because then I try to pay a little bit more attention, every single time afterwards the FBI would like make a move on somebody. It's like, okay, well, hold on, he made threats, blah, blah, blah. Like, well, hold on, this guy just made a threat on Twitter, like this guy was just memeing with her. Like, come on, like, is this really like that serious? But everybody has 20/20 hindsight, like you might have some guy that's tweeting like, I hate people that play X video game, I'm gonna kill them all, blah 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 blah, and everybody looks like it's a meme. But then as soon as the guy goes out and does it, people are like, look at this guy's Twitter feed, obviously he was dangerous. What's wrong? Like, damn, like that's really hard to determine before they actually commit the action.
No, you're right, because if we were, I think that's a really good point you just made, Steve. And I think that if the opposite were to happen and we were to crack down right from the get-go when anybody said something stupid online, imagine the reaction to that too, right? So this is why I'm not going for the sympathy vote here, but you're basically damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. And we've had a couple cases here where we've got people dead to rights that are planning X, Y, or Z, and we stop them in time. Then we're accused of violating their rights or being overbearing, or he didn't really mean it, or he was just kidding, or like what do you want us to do?
Yeah.
So
short of like things that where you're like specifically setting up something, it seems harder to get people on board with that. So I know in I think it was in 2013 there was a guy in Kentucky in the U.S. And I think this was a big one because I think it was the only refugee that we've caught that was trying to commit a terrorist act, I think. And it was somebody that was trying to sell arms to people in Iraq, but it was the FBI that he was communicating with the entire time, and they caught him. But that was because they basically got him, like you said, like dead to rights. Like the guy was trying to sell weapons or something, to like a counterintelligence officer, and he got screwed for that. But
well, and you've opened up a really interesting dynamic, and that's entrapment, right? At what point are you doing your job properly? So you're basically allowing the guy enough rope to hang himself, and then basically before he does something, you actually arrest him. We had a famous case here, also in 2013, of a young couple on the West Coast in Vancouver who wanted to blow up a Canada Day celebration on July 1st, and they had been inspired by the Boston Marathon bombers. So they researched pressure cooker bombs, all that kind of stuff, which apparently doesn't take a rocket scientist to build. And but they were basically being followed by an RCMP agent. So he was kind of their go-to guy. And then so they were arrested. Of course, the bombs were neutralized. They didn't work. They were arrested. A jury found them guilty. And then a judge said, no, this is entrapment. And the charge was thrown out, saying that, in the absence of the RCMP agent, they wouldn't have done this. And I actually testified in that case. I said, how do you know that? What if it had been an RCMP agent?
That's significantly different than how entrapment works in the U.S. How does what is considered entrapment in Canada?
Well, in this case, they said these people couldn't organize a piss up in a bar, and had it not been for the influence of the RCMP agent, this never would have happened. In other words, they claim the RCMP created the plot and got these two hapless fools to buy into it. Therefore, they are entrapped by law enforcement.
Interesting. So in the United States, the way that it's supposed to work is it only counts as entrapment if you wouldn't have done it anyways. So like if an agent... Well, so the way that it works is that like if an FBI agent were to concoct a plan to like, hey, like we're going to sell drugs to a whole bunch of school kids. If he walks up to you and he's like, hey, we've got this whole ring set up to sell drugs to school kids. Do you want to join in on it? If you say yes, then you can get dinged for that in the U.S. So it doesn't count as entrapment because you willingly, signed up for a plot. Even if they set everything up, if you willingly join up to do it, you're still breaking the law. Now, if an FBI agent were to walk up to you and be like, hey, you're going to come help me sell drugs to kids, I'm going to beat the shit out of you, or something really bad is going to happen to you. Well, now it's entrapment because now you're being pressured into doing something that you wouldn't have to otherwise. That's my understanding of the U.S. of how it's supposed to work. Yeah.
Well, I think that's what the judge found in this case is that she basically saw these two people, and then they were reformed drug addicts and all kinds of stuff, and they were living on welfare, blah blah blah. And she made the decision that there's no way in hell that these people have the capability of doing this. And I argued, well, again, you don't have to have a PhD in chemistry to build a pressure cooker bomb. You don't have to have a PhD in history to understand Islamist extremism. And yet she said, well, I'm not convinced that these people were capable or willing. But again, where do you draw that line between people who express a desire to do something and then basically are... So the way that I try to express, okay, so you say the RCMP agent was, led them by the nose. He was responsible. What if they'd found somebody who wasn't under our control, a person that wasn't an agent?
Yeah, exactly. This is why it shouldn't count as entrapment, because if somebody else had set everything up, then they would have just went through with the crime, right? Like, well, yeah, exactly, yeah.
No, we see things differently in my country. I mean, there are times. I mean, I'm a very proud Canadian. I never want to be anything else, but sometimes I just shake my head at some of the things the judicial system does up here, and I think it's because we're kind of naive. You guys are a lot more. And let's face it, you guys had 9/11. And that had as an incredible blow to your psyche for such a long time. I always say that we're still living in a post 9/11 period. It may be dissipating a bit, although 20th anniversary come up this September. I think it had a tremendous effect. And so throughout the 2000s and 2010s, can you name a single case that failed? A terrorism case in your country? I don't think there were any. So juries and judges were all too ready to say, yep, he was going to do this, he's going to do that. We're going to nail him, and we're going to send him to whatever, to Supermax or whatever, because there was no political will to be seen as soft on terrorism. And I don't think we've had that kind of experience here in this country. And maybe judges and juries just aren't as, aware of the possibility.
Man, I'm sorry. I'm just reading this because I try to be fair, because I don't know, especially with you working in intelligence, I don't know if you would be a little biased on this, but this sounds wild to me. I'm going to have to read more on this. I can't understand. So apparently they had been making threats at a mosque first, violent threats at a mosque first, and that's why... And the judges threw it out because they were like, they don't think that without an external force, they wouldn't have been able to work. That's wild to me. So essentially, you find people that are making a threat of mosque. You go up to them and it's like, yo, I've got this plan to set up some pressure cookers. You guys want to take these down and go do another bombing? They're like, hell yeah, let's do it. And then the judge throws that out saying you entrapped them. That sounds wild to me. I can't. Yeah. That's really, really, really weird. Okay, that's very interesting to me.
In actual fact, Steve, I worked on this case right from the get-go, and what you said. So that's obviously you found that in open source. So I don't have to betray any secrets here. But we were aware of these people were saying stupid shit in mosques and that kind of stuff for a while, and that's why it became a really good case, because we were able to penetrate them with an agent at a very early stage. So you had control of the situation so there was never any risk to the public. So the pressure cooker bombs were inert. In the same way, our famous case, the Toronto 18 back in 2006, they got 3 tons of fertilizer. It was kitty litter. We substituted kitty litter so they wouldn't be able to hurt anybody. So
you guys, you were able to get these guys to plant. So I'm reading this, planting homemade bombs outside a government building. You had them all the way to the point where they actually planted what they thought were bombs.
And then try to detonate it, and it didn't work.
And they walked. That's insane to me. Wow. Okay. Jeez.
Yeah. Well, why don't you come north, Steve, and try to set our judges straight?
Oh my goodness. My understanding is that, and I could be wrong, but I read so many legal people talk, because entrapment is supposed to be a really misunderstood thing in the U.S. I'm almost positive that under U.S. law, entrapment means that they have to force you to do it. If they present you the opportunity to commit a crime and you jump on it, it doesn't count as entrapment in the United States.
Well, in actual fact, in this case, if you read more about it, the agent gave them ample opportunity to back out. Are you sure you want to do this? Are you sure you want to do this? are you sure you want to do this? And they
How
kept saying,
wait,
yep,
do you
yep, yep.
the defendants also demonstrated that they were not very intelligent. Wait, so wait, is that a good excuse to
Well, no shit, Sherlock. They weren't the sharpest pencils in the box, right? But boy, if we start judging people guilty or not guilty based on intelligence, we're gonna have a bunch of empty jails. I think
Uh-huh.
there aren't a lot of bright lights in jail, right?
Yeah.
You can't use that as an excuse for unless you're mentally incompetent. That's a whole other thing. Whole definition. We had a guy that walked into an armed forces recruiting center with a knife and started slashing people, and he was found not guilty by not mentally competent. Again, you know, I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm the
Yeah.
last. I don't want to rule on this. But
Yeah, we can move on. This is wild to me. The judge noted that while the couple does adhere to extremist views that advocate violence to send political messages, police overstepped the bounds of their authority. Oh my God. Okay, I'll
welcome to our world.
Jeez. Yeah, I don't know, man. I'm sorry. Wait, there are so many implications to how you do undercover investigations in because in the United States we do so much like this in terms of there's a really famous case in the United States of a woman I don't know how police set this up, but a woman basically contacted a man to murder her husband because she wanted out of the relationship, but the guy that she contacted was an undercover agent and he worked with her the entire way to set up the assassination, and they even got the point to where they faked the murder scene, like they had police lines where they blocked off the house, and then the woman went in for questioning and she was crying and then eventually they revealed like, hey, we've got tapes of everything. We know that you set this whole thing up or whatever. I wonder if in Canada that would get thrown out as entrapment because the police officer would have been the quote unquote assassin or something. I don't know.
Well, I think in this case too, it varies from judge to judge, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for whatever reason, like I said, they were found guilty by jury, and it was the judge that said, "I'm going to set aside this ruling, this guilty verdict by the jury, because I have serious issues with it."
Mm-hmm.
So she threw it out, and then the British Columbia Court of Appeals backed her and said, "Yes, this was entrapment." And so these people are basically they're free. So they, and I don't know. I mean, I don't want to go there, but I'm smelling a lawsuit down the road of unfair treatment or unfair attention or something. But we do that a lot here in Canada. We pay these people. But yeah, again, it just goes to point to, you've got everything in place. You've got your surveillance. You go to federal court to get warrants to intercept communications. Everything. You check every box. And at the end of the day, they say, well, you checked too many boxes, or you didn't check enough boxes, or you didn't do your job properly. And it's really, really frustrating. And the bottom line is no one died. So even if they walked, that could have been pretty bad. I don't know if you remember the Boston Marathon, right? I mean, only 3 people died. But like 250 were wounded by shrapnel when those things went off near the finish line of the Boston Marathon. This was going to be on Canada Day in the afternoon. Would have been in BC the legislature's in Victoria on Vancouver Island. This beautiful legislature, beautiful lawn. There would have been all kinds of kids and families there enjoying Canada Day. I mean, who knows what the death toll would have been or the injury toll. So even if these people got out on a technicality, call it, no one died and no one got hurt. So I guess you got to be satisfied with that at the end of the day.
Yeah. Well, so recentering. We're strayed quite a bit off. So you wrote a book relating to how Canada investigates using counterintelligence for terrorist activities committed by Canadians abroad or committed on Canadian soil. What's the name of your book? Wait, where's the link to where we can buy this? Just so I can start.
Oh, it's called The Peaceable Kingdom. That's an old word that refers to Canada. So it's on my website. So borealisthreatandrisk.com is the website. Because this one was self-published for the simple reason that even though my first 5 books were published, actually all by American publishers, I think the combination of COVID and because my book is not academic, these were academic publishers, which they had no problems publishing the first 5. Anyhow, long story short, they said, you know what, there's not a market for this. I said, fine. So I looked at self-publishing, and is it ever easy to self-publish?
Yeah.
And a heck of a lot cheaper and a heck of a lot quicker. So I went from end of manuscript to publishing in 2 months, which was amazing. So yeah, so it's borealisthreatandrisk.com. There's a link there to order the book. It's real cheap because it's self-published. And yeah, it's been selling really well, actually. I think I've sold more copies of this book in a month and a half than I have of my first 5 books in 5 years.
Oh, geez. Well, nice. All right.
Yeah. And you know what? For me, this was a bit of this is my sixth book. I like to use a lot of hockey metaphors because I'm Canadian
Mm-hmm.
and because I'm a goalie in hockey, although not a very good one.
Mm-hmm.
So this book is the goalie's book. So it's the sixth player on the ice, the goalie who stops pucks from going in the net. This is my tribute to the men and women who stop pucks from going in our net over the past 153 years.
Gotcha. What do you think is let's see. So I don't want people to not buy the book because we spoil it, but if you had to list or think of a couple of cool examples of like, here are some things that you probably don't know about a Canadian counterintelligence operation. What do you think are like, don't give away the most surprising stories in the book, but what do you think is like a surprising thing that a lot of people wouldn't realize?
The very first act of terrorism in Canada took place before we were 1 year old as a country. It took place in Ottawa in 1868, and one of our what we call our fathers of Confederation was killed by an Irish terrorist. And that was in the wake of here's something to enhance bilateral relations, Steve. In 1866, a bunch of Irish Americans called the Fenians invaded Canada to put pressure on Britain to give Ireland independence. And so they crossed the river at Buffalo, and they got halfway up the Niagara Peninsula before they were beaten back by a bunch of British militia and students from the University of Toronto. But they wanted to basically take over Canada, which would force Britain to grant Ireland independence. But so 2 years later, one of them assassinated this guy 1 block from Parliament, shot him and killed him. And that was the first act of terrorism in our country. And it was less than a year after we became an independent nation.
Gotcha. Well, damn.
There you go. You know what? There's a lot of things that don't make the headlines because they don't go anywhere. And the book talks about talking to people. I remember a case that I worked on where there's this guy, fairly young guy, saying stupid shit online. So we decided to go knock on his door and say, hey, we're from the security service, and we've heard from a reliable source that this is what you're saying online. Basically, you want to scare the shit out of someone, right?
Yeah.
Like, if the FBI comes knocking at your door, you're probably going to pay attention.
Yeah, I've had a few of these visits, so yeah, go ahead.
And they say, okay, this is your friendly security service saying that you might want to think twice before you do anything dumb. And so I don't. To me, I think it's a good tactic, especially early on, if someone's just kind of dipping their toe in the water. And so so this guy said, yeah, I get it, and he kind of stopped doing it. And then, interestingly enough, 6 years later, guess who comes back on the radar?
Same guy.
Exact same guy. He didn't listen. He listened to us for a little while, and then 6 years later decided, yeah, nope, I'm going to go back to what I used to do. I have no idea whatever happened to him, but I think what this points to is that there are no guarantees in this business. No matter what you do, it's really, really hard to get some people to disavow themselves of this kind of ideology. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Or sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just gonna ask: do you guys segregate your intelligence agencies out between like foreign and national surveillance and everything too? So kind of like how we have like the CIA and then the NSA and then the FBI. Like, do you have like different?
Okay, so we have an NSA equivalent. It's called CSE, so Communications Security Staff. I actually worked there for 17 and a half years before I joined the security service. We don't have a CIA. Believe it or not, Canada is the only member of the Five Eyes that does not do overseas foreign intelligence.
Gotcha.
I know. Don't get me started. It's a big debate in this country because Canadians are too goddamn polite. So we don't have a CIA equivalent. And so where I used to work in the security service is kind of like the FBI, but it's not law enforcement. So what happened is in the early 80s, we decided to differentiate law enforcement from security intelligence, kind of what the Brits did. So the Brits have MI5. Okay, this is the British Secret Service, Security Service rather. That's what CSIS is in Canada. And then we work with the law enforcement, the RCMP, when it goes from intelligence to possible criminal acts. That the RCMP has to do their own investigation to actually get enough evidence and lay charges and arrest people. So we don't have a CIA equivalent in Canada, and probably never will. In fact, there's this when CSIS was created in 1984, people were so paranoid about Canada being perceived as having spy service, they put this clause in the CSIS Act that says, "Oh yeah, you guys can collect foreign intelligence, but only within Canada." I mean, who else says that? Like, I mean, it's foreign intelligence for a reason, right? It means it's outside of your country. But we don't collect it in Canada.
In the USA, does the NSA have the ability to levy charges? Do you know?
No.
Okay,
no.
gotcha.
And NSA cannot spy on Americans in the same way that CSE can't listen in on Canadians. That's against your constitution. That's against our charter. So you have to get a warrant to intercept communications in both our countries. So the Signals Intelligence Agency is limited to listening to foreigners. So,
Gotcha.
of course, NSA's Fort George Meade in Washington, they got listening stations all over the world. They can gather up as much as they want, but they can't listen in on American conversations, or Canadian, or British, or Australian, or New Zealand. So the Five Eyes can't spy on each other. That was the agreement that was made after the Second World War. But we can spy on everybody else. But yeah, there's really very strong things in place to make sure that we're not violating constitutional rights.
Gotcha.
And I don't know about the FBI, but like, warrants are not handed out like candy. You've got to really show to a judge that you deserve this. This is extraordinary power for the state to have. And you have to demonstrate, like, up to yin yang, that you need this power to prevent something bad from happening. And I know from experience, I mean, I never applied for a warrant myself, but I had many friends who do. And if you're not on your game, the judge says, fuck off. I'm not giving you a warrant. You have to come back and show me that you need this, because I'm not going to grant you this power, because it is a very, very intrusive power. And you got to prove to me that you need it. And if you can't prove to me, I'm not going to give it to you. Which I think is good. I think that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I think for that, I think you're talking about, like, in the U.S. it would be our FISA courts, basically, right?
Yeah, FISA warrants. Yeah, yeah. But it's not a slam dunk by any stretch of the imagination. So, but you look at our history. I mean, yes, we're the Five Eyes, but there's incredible cooperation, and always has been. I look at the amount of sharing that these 5 countries do, and it's absolutely phenomenal. I mean, there's very, very sensitive information that is shared amongst these 5 partners. And again, it speaks, I think, to the fact that we trust each other. This is a well-established alliance that's been going on now for 75 years. And during the Cold War, by the way, did you know the Cold War started in Canada? I
did not know that.
In September of 1945, after we won the war, and Joe Stalin was our best friend, a cipher clerk at the embassy, the Soviet embassy in Ottawa, defected, and he told the RCMP that the Soviet embassy had been spying on Canadians for 20 years. No one knew that, and that's the start of the Cold War.
Crazy. I did not know that. Hold on, wait. Okay, because I see a couple people in chat are posting. Okay, so the FISA warrants in the United States have an incredibly high approval rate, and people tend to cite that as trying to imply that FISA warrants are basically just rubber stamps. My understanding is that the reason why those have such a high approval rate is because they're tough warrants to get. There's usually a lot of back and forth communication between, like, the FISA warrant people, so the judges, and then the people in law enforcement that are trying to get those warrants. So you're not going to go to a judge to apply for a FISA warrant if you know that you've got, like, shitty reasoning for it. That, like, because the threshold is so high and there's a lot of back and forth that goes on there, that typically they're only going to bring applications for those warrants if they know that they're going to get approved. That's that's articles that I read in terms of, like, why that approval rate is so high.
I think that's true. Because if you go forward with a bunch of shitty information too many times in a row, next time you go up, the judge says, "Piss off! I don't want to see you today." So you don't want to get on a judge's bad side by wasting his or her time. So you make sure you've dotted all your I's, crossed you dotted your I's, crossed your T's, because you want to show from the get-go that yes, you've done your homework, and that you've looked at all the cases and the reasons why. Because you don't want to walk away looking stupid, and so that's why you get such a high approval rate. I don't think our approval rate is that high in Canada, not from what I've heard anecdotally, which means that either judges are just reluctant to do it, or the applications aren't as robust as they should be. I'm not sure.
Gotcha. So coronavirus lockdown time seems like a bad time for terrorists. How have they been doing over the past year? Feels like in a lot of countries you're missing out on a lot of opportunities for big gatherings or anything.
You know what? That's a great question. And a buddy of mine I used to work with just came out with a paper. And he said there's been this assumption that COVID would lead to more terrorism. In actual fact, it appears to lead to less. And there's two ways to interpret that. One is what you just said, is that there aren't as many large gatherings as you had before. And what does a terrorist want? Who wants a large gathering? Yeah. So you're not going to get as many. You still see it happening in Afghanistan and Somalia, Nigeria. And because it's going to happen there anyway, regardless of COVID or not. The other thing, of course, is the lack of travel. No one's going anywhere. So you don't have Americans and Canadians going abroad. You don't have people trying to come into our country and doing things. The other thing which is interesting about the whole COVID thing is there's been this assumption, which again, my buddy showed categorically was wrong, at least so far, that the lockdowns and the economic downturn and the anti-vaxxers and the COVID conspiracy theorists would get so angry at what's happening that you'd get a lot more what you guys call domestic terrorism. And we haven't seen that either. We haven't seen an uptick in, January 6th notwithstanding. which I'm not even sure was totally an act of terrorism. That's a big argument that, we've been having for months now. But we haven't seen an uptick in domestic terrorism since. We've had more demonstrations and more people saying stupid shit online. But as I said before, everybody said stupid shit online. So we haven't had that one-to-one relationship. And I've been kind of pushing back on that, saying, why did we assume that just because COVID was here, we're going to see an increase in acts in our country? People are angry. People are angry all the time. I mean, look back to other economic downturns. Did we see an increase in previous economic downturns? And the answer is no. No, this is a special time. I've seen the impact on your country. Was it you're over 500,000 deaths now, I believe, from COVID? The economy's in the tank. I mean, who knows what the budget? My country's $1 trillion in debt because of this. I don't know what your country is. Didn't Biden just sign a $9 trillion?
$1.9 trillion.
$1.9 trillion, yeah. So, all of our economies are in the shitter right now, and it's going to be a while before we recover. But we haven't seen a correlating spike in terrorist attacks. And I'm not surprised at that, because, again, I think the bottom line, and for everyone that's on the live stream today, people have to realize that in Canada, United States, thankfully, terrorism is a blip. It's a rounding error in terms of criminal behavior in our countries. Now, if you're in Afghanistan or Somalia or Nigeria, it's the opposite. It happens all the time. I tweet daily about attacks in Afghanistan and in Somalia and Nigeria. In our countries, it happens very, very rarely.
You guys you had a big mass shooting or something last year, didn't you? Right? You got like AR-15s banned or some crazy shit happened. We had a guy that basically borrowed an RCMP vehicle, an RCP uniform, and shot 22 people out east. Yeah, but we wouldn't call that terrorism. Like his motivation wasn't terrorist. He just wanted to kill people. In the same way, if you want to talk about the guy the so-called incel guy in Toronto who was found guilty on all 26 counts, he wasn't a terrorist either. He was a mass murderer. He fantasized about setting a record for mass murders. Mass murderers unless they're terrorists. Do you guys have a stringent definition of terrorism in Canada?
We do. Stringent up to a point. So according to the criminal code, an act of terrorism is a serious act of violence, either planned or executed for political, ideological, or religious reasons. That's what the criminal code says. Now, define ideology.
Yeah, or political, right?
Define political, right? In the end, the guy in Toronto was essentially a bit of a loser, and he'd been fantasizing about Columbine and what was that one in Connecticut, Sandy Hook? He'd been fantasizing about those for years or for months and months, and he basically wanted to set a record. He wanted to become famous by becoming an infamous mass murderer. Now, he claims to have been an incel, and I read the judge's report on this. The judge said he basically lied about most things, including the fact that he knew Elliot Rodger, that he knew Chris Mercer, and he'd been in touch with them, blah, blah, blah. He was using the incel as a veneer. He wasn't actually an incel. He had issues with women. He had issues with dating and relationships, but he wasn't the same way that Elliot Rodger went out explicitly because he wanted to do that, right? This guy was a whole mass of motivations, but the primary ones, he wanted to kill a whole bunch of people. So he was not charged with terrorism, and he was not found guilty of terrorism. He was found guilty of mass murder, 10 counts of first-degree murder and 16 counts of attempted murder.
Gotcha.
So I think we got to be really careful. Sometimes terrorists are mass murderers, but most mass murderers are not terrorists, because the reason they do so has nothing to do with politics, ideology, or religion. They just want to kill people because it gets them off. Sure. Right. Yeah. And I think we run into real problems when we start calling too many things terrorism, because it kind of waters down things. I don't know, Steve, in your country, but there was no terrorism offense in Canada before 9/11.
I imagine there must have been in the U.S.
Because we brought in legislation in December of 2001 after 9/11. But prior to that, you couldn't be charged with terrorism. You could be charged with murder, attempted murder, whatever. And I've argued, and I worked in counter-terrorism for 15 years, I've argued that we could get rid of the terrorism clause tomorrow. Wouldn't make a damn bit of difference. You can still charge them with murder, attempted murder, assault, whatever. Terrorism just makes it complicated. In fact, if you're the prosecution, you have to prove motivation. You don't have to prove the act. If I catch you with a knife in your hand and a body at your feet, I kind of know you killed the guy, right? Yeah. How do I know why you killed him? Unless you tell me, or unless you have a manifesto like Anders Breivik there in Norway with his 1,500-page manifesto, who's the guy in 2011 that killed those kids at that island. So why complicate things by seeking motivation when you can get an easy verdict, guilty verdict, on the act itself? Something to think about, right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
We seem to go back and forth a lot on
I know.
like arguing what the definitions of terrorism is, or what counts as a terrorist attack, or what counts as a terrorist organization, or stuff like that. Yeah, and I've seen a lot of conflicting stuff thrown around where some people are like, well, if it's terrorist, it has to have like foreign funding or foreign influence. Or I've heard your
That's what,
definition as
yeah,
well, where it has to have like a
that's where your that's where
political.
your country went for the longest time. And I think January the 6th is changing the dialogue in your country. But prior to that, to be terrorism in the United States, it had to have a foreign link. If the link wasn't there, it wasn't terrorism. They called it something else, and which is a kind of an artificial distinction, isn't it? Like, why does the foreign link have to be there? Who cares? It's all about the motivation. The problem is, as you said, last time I checked, there's over 200 definitions of terrorism around the world.
Yeah, it's a really inconsistent thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the UN has one, you guys have one, we have one, academics have one, law enforcement has one, the EU has one. Yeah, it's a real dog's breakfast of definitions. And I think it just complicates things too much where it's outlived its usefulness. I mean, I get it. I get 9/11. I get the impact that's had. But you could, I mean, had those guys survived, you could just as easily have charged them with 3,000 counts of first-degree murder, right?
Yeah.
You didn't have to charge them with terrorism. I mean, anyhow, but it's an emotional thing. But, you know, people just can't agree on the definition. And that really muddies the waters when you're trying to actually prosecute somebody. So I'm not sure it's all that necessary anymore.
Yeah. I just don't know. Yeah. The only thing I could possibly think of, like, that I wouldn't, maybe a terrorist charge like gives you the ability to do a bigger investigation or indict more people or something. I don't know, but
It might.
yeah.
But what I found interestingly in my country is that being found guilty of terrorism does not lead to a significantly longer sentence. So the guy that walked to a mosque in Quebec City in 2017, he killed 6 people at prayer. He wasn't even charged with terrorism, despite the fact he definitely had some far-right extremist leanings. He was charged with terrorism, and he pleaded guilty, and he got 40 years in jail, which is pretty significant in Canada, trust me. So we didn't need to go down that terrorism road. And we have an interesting case that's before the courts now of a guy after that Manassian guy in Toronto. He stabbed a woman in Toronto, I think last year, killed one, wounded one. He was arrested, charged with murder. And then 3 months later, they changed the charges to terrorism. And now they're going to have to prove that he did it for terrorist reasons. And I'm not sure they're going to get there.
Sounds really hard. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Well, damn.
Yeah.
Well,
I was actually going to ask you. I'm not sure how to pose this question, but there's an awful lot of talk in your country, and I see that you host people all the time, and sort of in this regard, this notion of domestic terrorism, right? Far right terrorism. You know, like white nationalists and Proud Boys and Oath Keepers and Boogaloo Boys and all this kind of stuff. I've seen a lot of people say that this is kind of the new priority, and that we should actually stop caring as much about other forms of terrorism, what you would call normally foreign terrorism, so like ISIS and Al Qaeda, that kind of stuff. And I get real worried when I hear that, because it's true, especially in the United States. I think there's a real concern about the far right. We certainly have seen a lot of action that is, you know, certainly is violent in nature. But when you look at it beyond your sort of your national borders, 99% of all attacks that are carried out in the world aren't carried out by the far right. They're carried out by jihadis. They're carried out by Islamist extremists, whether it's Afghanistan or Pakistan or Somalia or Democratic Republic of Congo or Mozambique or Nigeria or Mali. The list goes on and on and on and on and on. And I'm wondering, why is everybody so insistent that that's kind of like yesterday's problem?
Well, I think that because when you think about domestic terrorism, at least in the United States, I think it's more considered to be a far right problem, that we don't have much jihadi terrorism or ISIS terrorism going on U.S. soil anymore.
No, I don't disagree with you. What I'm worried about is that people are now extrapolating beyond that and saying that, you know, the number one priority for law enforcement, security, intelligence should be the far right, meaning we should take resources away from the other guys. And there's one thing I know: when you take resources away, that's usually when something bad happens. When you shift from A to B, usually it's A that blows up next.
Oh, sure.
And you know, the problem is that you've always got finite resources. And my worry is that in a COVID period where you're gazillions of dollars in debt, do you think that the FBI and CSIS and are going to get more resources tomorrow? It ain't going to happen, because there are other priorities. You got to get your economy going, for Christ's sake, as we do here in Canada. So my fear is that you're going to put more and more burdens on your law enforcement and security services, but not give them more money and resources to do it, which means they're going to have to make choices about who to follow. Let's not even get into foreign interference. and foreign espionage and cyber attacks, which are happening on a daily basis, right? Whether
Which
it's the
we
Chinese
totally
or the North
don't
Koreans or
care
the
at all
Russians
about.
or,
But yeah.
I mean, when you work in this business, I mean, that's what, when you go to work in the morning, you kind of, you got like 9 balls in the air and you can only juggle 2. So which 2 do you choose that day?
Yeah. So the
And
worry
yet,
would be that if we are doing, if we start increasing surveillance on like far right groups in the U.S., that perhaps it gives the opportunity for
yep.
jihadists or somebody to come back. Maybe. Yeah.
But I don't think you. But on the other hand, I'm not saying you shouldn't increase resources, and I think the United States is an outlier in this way. Maybe Germany too. Germany's got a significant problem with this, but most other countries that I've seen, I mean, I would still say that the vast majority of our citizens who think that terrorism is a good idea are still leaning more towards the jihadis and not towards the far right. But you've got to figure a way to do the 2 simultaneously, and then to throw something else in the mix. What about the far left, which is a whole contentious issue, right? And I'm not trying to jump in the bandwagon about Antifa and all that kind of stuff, but the day is coming when we're going to get probably a growth in what we would call far left terrorism,
Yeah, it's possible.
environmental,
I think.
global warming, that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, I think in the U.S. we haven't really seen any of that yet. I think generally what
No,
we see
no.
domestically is the far right stuff, so that's where the focus is. But I mean, yeah, hopefully they can multitask, right, and they still keep eyes on.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I think that people that I worked with, I mean, they were generalists by nature, so the actual investigation itself didn't matter. They had the skill set to recruit the human sources, do that kind of stuff. It was guys like me, the specialists in the background, who would help them understand. Okay, I don't understand what this guy's saying. Can you tell me? Well, yeah, here's what he's saying. So this is where the analysts come in, because the analysts have the ability to specialize. The actual agents, they don't specialize. They're hired for their skill set as being able to run an investigation, irrespective of whether it's a foreign espionage investigation or counter-terrorism or God knows what. But you've got the specialists in the background who have that unique knowledge that can help them when they get into trouble, when their target says something or whatever they don't understand. So I think I think the FBI is well placed. I think CSIS and RCMP are well placed. We're not going to get it perfect because we're human.
Yeah, of course.
But we get a lot more things right than we get wrong. But as I said before, it's only when you get things wrong that people say, "Hey, you fucked up. Why did you fuck up?"
Yeah. Yep. True. Is there anything else you want to go over? Anything else you want to talk about?
This is good. This has been a pretty good, wide-ranging talk. So I just want to thank you, Steve, for giving me the opportunity to plug the new book. So again, it's on borealisthreatandrisk.com. And I'm also, I don't want to steal your thunders, but I also do live streaming as well on all things terrorism related, usually at 8 p.m. Eastern. But again, I don't want to interfere with your live streaming at the same time.
No, you're good. What is your what's your link to your stream, or what do you stream?
Yeah, so just go to put in Phil Gursky on YouTube, and you'll find me. I'm the only Phil Gursky out there, and so I live stream at 8 o'clock Eastern on right now on Mondays and Thursdays. Just generally a theme for the night. So tonight's theme is going to be about how some terrorist causes never go away. I'm going to deal with a cause that's been there for about 800 years. And we have and the beauty, of course, that I'm new to live streaming. Right? You're a veteran at this. I'm a newbie. Is the ability to have the conversations with people and have a direct dialogue going. So it's kind of cool. I'm really enjoying it.
Awesome. Yeah. Cool. Well, hey, if you ever have any other things, just shoot me an email.
I'll reach out to you. Thanks a lot, Steve.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Phil. Have a good one, man.
Hey, take care. You too. Bye.
Anybody ready to tweet? Just kidding. Okay.